Good evening. An international hunt is underway for the husband of a murdered woman whose body was found in the boot of a car in East London. Harshita Brella was discovered in Brisbane Road in Ilford, tens of miles away from her home in Northamptonshire. The prime suspect is her husband, Pankaj Lamba, who's believed to have fled the country. Our correspondent, Simon Harris, has the story.
Brisbane Road in Ilford is a quiet residential street. At one end, there's a popular park. It was in this cul-de-sac, overlooked by a council CCTV camera, that someone parked a car with a body in the boot.
That I'm surprised of, because it's so much, so many cameras here. I wouldn't expect that. I would expect it to be somewhere a bit more foresty. So I think maybe he wanted her to be found.
It all sounds a bit strange, really, doesn't it? You know, all the way from the Midlands to park at the end of a cul-de-sac in Ilford. It's all a bit odd, really.
The body in the car was identified as Harshita Brella, a 24-year-old woman from Corby in Northamptonshire. Police say she was murdered. Her husband, Pankaj Lamba, is the prime suspect. It was on Wednesday Northamptonshire police were alerted by a member of the public concerned for a woman's welfare. In the early hours of Wednesday morning, the body was discovered in the car boot. Yesterday, the police named her husband and launched an international manhunt.
Our inquiries lead us to suspect that Harshita was murdered in Northamptonshire earlier this month by her husband, Pankaj Lamba. We suspect he transported Harshita's body from Northamptonshire to Ilford by car. We now believe he has fled the country.
Detectives released this picture of Lamba on foot and with a rucksack on his back, said to be at what police called a transport hub. It takes about 20 minutes to walk from Brisbane Road to Ilford Station. From there, Elizabeth Line trains take less than an hour to get to Heathrow Airport. The focus of attention has switched to the couple's home in Corby.
Starting last week, we've seen a police car parked here, and it was like every day there was a police car there, so we were a bit curious why the police were there. I think my girlfriend's dad asked the police officer, and he said something to do with a domestic or something, I'm not sure.
They were like normal people, normal working people, but like what was happening in their personal life, private life, we don't know much about them.
Detectives haven't said why they think Harshita's body was dumped in Brisbane Road. A number of people living here have been asked to hand over security camera footage. Simon Harris, ITV News, Ilford.
Good evening. Earlier today, thousands of farmers made the journey from pasture to Parliament as they went head-to-toe with the government over inheritance tax. In the budget, the Chancellor said that all farms worth more than £1 million will pay 20% tax when it's passed on. The National Farmers Union says that is a devastating blow to the industry and could spell the end of generational farming. Our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
Nellie Budd's early start began like any other. The first job of the day to feed the cattle on her farm at Brockham in Surrey. But a few hours later, she swapped her overalls for a wax jacket and a sturdy pair of boots to march on Westminster.
I've come here today for my children's future and just for the future, for us to want to invest in our farm, for it to be there for the next generation. We're fourth generation, you know, we need it to be there for the fifth, sixth, seventh. You know, that is our countryside, that's what I'm passionate about.
Nellie was among an estimated 13,000 people who, according to the Met Police, joined the rally in Whitehall. The road was closed to traffic as protesters poured in from all corners of the country to listen to speeches. Britain's best-known newbie farmer, recovering from heart surgery, laid into the government over the budget tax changes.
I beg of the government to be big, to accept that this was rushed through, it wasn't thought out, and it's a mistake. That's the big thing to do, admit it, and back down. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
3 hours after people began to gather, protesters were still arriving. The organisers planned to hold the rally in Trafalgar Square, but as more and more people registered to take part, it was clear the square wouldn't be big enough. So it was moved to Whitehall instead. Scott, who farms 300 acres near Brentwood in Essex, isn't ready to retire, but thinks he may be forced to give his land to his 3 sons now to avoid the inheritance tax.
They would inherit it, but there's a 7-year, I've got to survive 7 years. So I'm 60 now, 67 before they would actually have it. Who knows? At 60, you don't know how long you're going to live.
The protesters were allowed close to the Downing Street gates, although they weren't heard by the Prime Minister. He's in Brazil.
The vast majority of farms will not be affected by these changes to inheritance tax, but it's only right we ask the very wealthiest to pay their fair share. Otherwise, we can't fix services like the National Health Service that farmers rely on and people living in rural communities just like everybody else.
It wasn't just farmers joining the demonstration. Donna, who's a songwriter, came up from Surrey.
I want to support British farmers because I'm born in England. I'm a British person, English Jamaican, and I think what they're doing to the farmers is evil, very evil.
This was the first big protest faced by the Starmer government. The farmers have delivered a message, but ministers show no sign of changing course.
So, Simon, clearly lots of frustration from farmers today, but I guess the big question is what happens now? Do we expect this to trigger some kind of U-turn?
Well, there was certainly a lot of anger and passion there today, but the government continues to insist that no more than 500 farms a year will be affected by the changes. That's disputed by organisations representing landowners. But you have to ask, how often do big demonstrations change government policy? Think back to 2002 and the Countryside Alliance. That didn't stop the ban on hunting. 2003, the Stop the War protest. That didn't stop the war in Iraq. 2010, the student protests, which ended in riots. That didn't stop the rise in tuition fees. The authorities will be relieved that today's protest passed off without any trouble, but ministers show no signs of wanting to reward farmers for their good behaviour with any kind of concessions.
All right, OK. All right, Simon, thank you.
But first, Sadiq Khan has come under fire from Conservative Assembly members questioning why the Mayor's push for more government investment in the capital has weakened under a Labour government. It's the latest fallout from the budget to hit London. With more, here's our political correspondent Simon Harris from Westminster.
The tribal nature of politics is never more obvious than in the chamber at City Hall. And today, Tories on the London Assembly accused Sadiq Khan of reneging on a promise to make public what he wanted from the budget and of no longer standing up for London. But he batted away their questions, saying they'd have to wait until after next year's Comprehensive Spending Review, or CSR.
So the £4.9 billion a year that you said previously many times that London needs for housing, is that a demand that you're still making of the government?
We set out our ask for government for the CSR, and we're making sure our demands of the government, as in the words of the member, are made public. That'll be in advance of the CSR rather than the emergency budget, which was had last month.
Right, so when I asked you about this previously, you said you would be telling me either before or just after the budget, and now we've just had the budget, you're telling me to wait for the CSR.
The CSRs, I'm told, in late spring, early summer. I look forward to making representations to the government. I'll make this public.
On transport, last year you said you needed, for TfL, 569 million. Do you still say that TfL needed 569 million?
The amount of money received last month was almost double the amount of money received last year, and the Commissioner is very pleased with the £405 million from the government. What we're after from the CSR is a multi-year capital settlement.
Now you have a Labour government, you have a choice to be a Labour mayor who supports Londoners above the government, and please can you do that? You're not making the representations for London that you once would have done really easily. This is a choice that you have to make, and I hope you make the right one.
We'll be discussing the fallout from the government's budget, as well as what a Trump presidency might mean for London in the late debate here on ITV1 after news at 10.
Next, a post-budget rise in school fees isn't just giving parents of private school pupils something to worry about. There are warnings the impact could be felt in state schools too. Labour's VAT charge on private schools could be a particular problem in counties like Surrey, where there's already a big squeeze on places for pupils. Our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
Think about balanced forces.
At Cranley School in Surrey, fifth formers are getting their heads around the laws of physics.
We've got weight, we've got drag. A larger parachute would have a larger drag, a faster parachute would have a larger drag.
The parents of these teenagers pay almost £50,000 a year for their education. But from January, private school fees will be hit with VAT. Cranley's head fears some parents will have no choice.
I suspect there will be a number of students who may feel that as they get to a transition point, either from our prep school up to the senior school at 13, they may decide to go state then, or possibly at 16 for sixth form. Obviously, we hope that that's not going to be the case.
What do we think of Stella staying in the marriage that's abusive?
The tax on school fees was a Labour manifesto pledge announced by the Chancellor in last month's budget.
94% of children in the UK attend state schools. To provide the highest quality of support and teaching that they deserve, we will introduce VAT on private school fees from January 2025.
Ian, a former soldier who works as a financial advisor, has cut his pension contributions so his 11-year-old son can stay at another of Surrey's private schools.
People like myself who are middle earners, we're paying our taxes, we're paying our dues. I'm actually paying for my son's educational place at school, and it's a place that's given up in lieu of somebody else that may be more in need, or perhaps that money's being deployed in the area of special educational needs.
In a statement, a Treasury spokesperson said ending tax breaks on private schools will help to raise the revenue needed to break down the barriers of opportunity for children and young people.
The reason why this policy is so frustrating is that it's going to cause problems for all our schools. It's going to mean fewer school places in state, more competition.
With schools like Cranley, we are big employers within our local area. If these schools were to go under, then of course unemployment within these areas is going to rise as well, affecting people's livelihoods and the stability of their jobs, and in some cases generations of jobs that have gone right through their families.
The government's decision to tax school fees is unlikely to spell the end of Cranley's 160-year history, but some smaller schools may struggle. Simon Harris, ITV News.